Hey all, it's Dinosaur, and I'm actually talking about something interesting I kind of came across the net um, about Russian cosmonauts. I never really knew about this story, but I think it's worth something to think about. I think it's worthwhile. It's not really a conspiracy theory so much, but it's something that it's interesting. There were these two Italian amateur radio guys that captured signals from Russian satellite transmissions, and they captured some unusual transmissions from the signals. Now, if you understand the concept of radio or the Doppler effect, that when you're listening to a frequency, or you have your ears out listening, okay, if you look at, for example, if the target is up here and you're listening over here, okay, what will happen here is that if the transmission's on the other side of the planet and going up, because of your position, you will not hear the transmission. It's line of sight, okay? And then what you will hear the transmissions from the piece because it shoots out like this, big old circle, and then it'll effectively hit here and here, where it'd be nice to hear both transmissions because of your geographic positioning. That's not possible. But what it was interesting here is that these particular transmissions were quite fascinating because through use of a scientific method called the Doppler effect, these radio guys can measure the distance of an object with its transmission and as it moved. The first one that's interesting was approximately 5 months before the first man in space was deemed and returned to Earth by the Russians, that there was an SOS transmission. Um, and the thing is, they measured this using the Doppler effect. They measured the transmission with the SOS, and the item got further and further away from the planet, and then eventually this transmission ceased. More likely because either A ran out of power or B. So for all we know, that could have been a satellite, that could have been someone in it, but they didn't achieve orbit. And not many people know this. Everybody thinks, oh, you get up to a certain point, you get into orbit. No, no, no. That's not how orbit works. Orbit works where you launch and then you curve your trajectory and essentially you slingshot yourself around the Earth to a point where satellites will catch you and just kind of keep you in a perpetual orbit. All right, if you launch and you keep going up and you're not slingshotting with the Earth, you'll just go by. The Earth won't pull you in. You'll just keep going. So that this is in the early days of the space race. The second unique transmission that they came across was a man breathing. Same thing, where they found there was a man breathing very heavily, wheezing, and with these noises in the background. Um, the father of the two radio guys, who happened to be a cardiologist, listened to the recording and determined that it was basically a man's last breaths before he ran out of air because of the difficulty he had. Interesting. The third thing that is kind of interesting is the story of a female voice. Now this one's interesting. Russia traditionally has been dominated by like male society and all that, but this is interesting. They sent a woman up on that. Well, supposedly sent a woman up because the transmissions from the woman were very clear. They said they were going off numbers, and she kept asking, um, "Are you listening to me? Why won't you talk to me?" And kept complaining it was getting hot, it was getting hot, it was getting hot. And this is on reentry. Almost likely. I think it was then there was another recording approximately 2 months later of something very similar, but the voice was screaming in pain and anguish, which they couldn't record because it was too quick. But that was the end of the transmission. Was says, "Are you listening?" And listening hot, then it was dead. in theory, that person died upon reentry. So, so these are some interesting phenomena, and even with all these things, the United States tried to keep their signal secret from these Italian brothers, but they just figured out what the signal is by the length of the antennas. Never underestimate the power of human ingenuity. So anyway, these guys came up with it and it told this story. Now I think it's really interesting that this happened, but here's what's really peculiar. Over 50 years since these events occurred, Russia still has not acknowledged whether or not they did or did not do these things and people died. And they're very high, and a lot of part of the space program still have not been declassified or found or released. And that's what's interesting on that. So it's not really a conspiracy theory, but it also puts some perspective that the first person in space may not have actually been the first person in place. It's only the first person who came back that they could document and prove. Everyone else may have just died. There's even theories that Russia made it to the moon, but they couldn't get their people back. Which was actually the part of an inspiration of a movie. I think it's Apollo 19 or Apollo 20, where there was a movie set in that time era where they sent three more guys to the moon, and the moon was actually covered by these space alien rock beasts, and they eventually they couldn't come back on that. And what was funny is that they found in this movie they found a Russian pod, went over it, started talking on the radio saying our pod is in trouble, we need help, and then all of a sudden the American radio Houston started coming over the Russian frequency, said we're not coming to get you, son, we'll stay on the line air with you, but we're not coming to get you. You're gonna die, hero. And eventually, the aliens come and get the guys here. But that's really interesting. Like with this, it just makes you think about some of the stuff that maybe in space. There's even a rumor about how we heard an SOS from another galaxy in Andromeda, but that actually message came from another galaxy when saber-toothed tigers roamed the Earth. And and we received it back in 1998, but weren't able to translate it until 2013, which they've actually proven that's false on that. But it still fuels the imagination. So, it's unfortunate with exploring a new frontier, you will run into situations where mistakes will be covered up. Um, but at the same time, I have to compliment the brave people that went up there with no guarantees that coming back. So, anyway, this is Dinosaur. I hope you found this a little interesting, and I'll talk to you all later. Bye.